Hello everyone. Welcome back to another Magic the Gathering Commander review. We are in the Planar Chaos set, which takes iconic characters, amongst other things. It takes iconic characters and gives them a twist on their color identity and kind of how they work mechanically. So today we are talking about Crovax, Ascendant Hero. And I can't remember the full name of Crovax, the mono black version. But this is the mono white version, so it's a little bit different than what the mono black does. Crovax is a legendary human noble. It's got power and toughness 4/4 with a mana value of 6, 4 generic and 2 white, and much more simple than compared to the previous two commanders we've talked about. There we go, in this set so far. Crovax has two static abilities. The first one says other white creatures get +1/+1. So it doesn't count itself, but other white creatures, including your opponents, get +1/+1. Non-white creatures, this is the second static ability. Non-white creatures get -1/-1. So Crovax really wants white creatures in play, and it does not want non-white creatures in play. So we're going to build around that and take advantage of it. And then lastly, it has one activated ability, Pay 2 Life. Return Crovax to its owner's hand. So it does have this really, honestly, very effective form of protection. It can remove itself from play to keep it safe from a board wipe or from like a targeted removal. However, the fact that you have to return it to your hand does mean that you have to pay 6 mana from your hand to cast it again. Maybe build a way to cheat it into play somehow. And depending on how the board state looks, when it leaves play, that might weaken your board or strengthen your opponent's board, depending on what's going on there. So just bear that in mind. But as far as ways to protect itself, it's pretty good. Really, really good. Some card rulings for this commander, all of which came out in 2021, so pretty recent rules updates. The first one is if Crovax, Ascendant Hero, stops being white, it gives itself -1/-1. There are, predominantly you'll see this in like blue cards can change the color of something. So if Crovax ever becomes something besides white, Azorius, it's still considered white, so it's got to become mono blue. It's got to become Gruul colors. It's got to be something that doesn't have white in it, right? As soon as it does become that, though, it will give itself -1/-1. Second, because damage remains marked on a creature until the damage is removed as the turn ends, non-lethal damage dealt to white creatures may become lethal if Crovax leaves the battlefield during that turn. And non-lethal damage dealt to non-white creatures may become lethal if Crovax enters the battlefield during that turn. Which is very interesting. That's kind of what I was referring to earlier when I said if you pay the 2 life and you return it to your hand, it may alter how the board looks, depending on how it looks. It essentially is a plague effect for non-white creatures, which is very unique, by the way. That's not a thing that happens in mono white, is plague effects. But it's a plague effect, which means if you have things like damage or -1/-1 counters, anything like that, those plague effects can cause lethality to your opponent's creatures. It could cause lethality to your creatures as well, because it is buffing your creatures. However, if it is removed from play, then your creatures are going to lose that +1/+1 they had earlier. So bear that in mind with this commander. It can be a little tricky, but honestly, it is a great commander. I mean, this is essentially the budget, not as effective version of like Elish Norn, which is even crazier to think about, but it works the same way as Elish Norn. So if you played against that Praetor, you know how this commander will work. If third ability, or third rule, if a second Crovax, Ascendant Hero, comes under your control, you'll put 1 into its owner's graveyard due to the legend rule, at the same time that any creatures getting -2/-2 are put into their owner's graveyard for having 0 or less toughness. Whoa. That is interesting. Okay, that's cool to note. So, if you don't have a way to bypass the legend rule, that is interesting. I never thought of that. So, even though the legend rule will come into play, and you will have to sacrifice one of those creatures because the game's like, oh hey, pause the game. We gotta fix this. There's 2 legendary creatures of the same name. You have to pick one and sacrifice the other. But because it is in play, when the game pauses, their static abilities are prevalent. Just like how if you had 2 legendaries that had Enter the Battles triggers, one, you choose one to sacrifice, but you still get that ETB from the legendary creature. This works in the same way, where it is in play, the game is paused, but it is in play. You just have to choose one to sacrifice. It does stack that static ability because the static ability is always happening. That is interesting. So you can, in effect, give -2/-2 to your opponent's board, which is very, very cool. I didn't know that. Final rule for this commander. Crovax's last ability can be activated only while it's on the battlefield. You can't do it from the graveyard, you can't do it from the hand, because it's already in the hand, and you can't do it from the command zone. You can only do it from the battlefield. There's a lot of effects like this. It's kind of common sense to think that like you can only do those things when it's on the battlefield. If it ever can be done from any other zone, the card should specify activate this while it's in the graveyard, activate this, discard this from your hand, activate this from the command zone. The card will specify if you can do it outside of the battlefield. If it doesn't specify, it can only be done in the battlefield. An important thing to note, though, is if someone tries to interact with your bouncing to your hand, it is an instant speed activated ability, so you can just do it again. You'll inevitably pay 2 life every time, but if someone tries to counter your activated ability, you can activate it again just to reassure, just to like guarantee that you're going to save your commander. So it's difficult to interact with protecting this commander, which is very cool. Just a little redundancy for this deck. Honor of the Pure is an enchantment that, again, will Anthem boost up all of your creatures in play. And then a fun deck idea to build with this commander is probably going to be the hardest deck idea to build around, but if you can do it, and I was hoping when I was making this presentation, I was hoping we were going to get more support in Lorwyn Eclipse. We didn't get a ton of support for this, unfortunately, but I was hoping to get some goat tribal support, building a mono-white goat deck, where the whole point is to make an army of 0/1 white goat creature tokens. Crovax will give them +1/+1, making them 1/2s, which means you can now defeat your opponents with goats, which is super cool. Obviously, you will probably want to run like Elish Norn as the backup or even the primary commander to this deck, just to have even more redundancy of beefing up your board. But this is kind of a go-wide token deck, which white does very well. You can go wide easily with Populate mechanic in this deck, and have fun, cool anthems to overrun the board with your goats. And that's going to do it for Crovax Ascendant Hero. Very cool card. A fun anthem effect, and really cool that you could make a token copy of it and effectively, for a brief moment, do a soft board wipe to all of your opponent's weak creatures, as long as there's no white in them. That's really the downside to this card, is if your opponent's playing a Esper deck, a 5-color deck, a Azorius deck, a Boros deck, anything that has white in it, there's always the guarantee that some of your opponent's stuff is going to stay in play because they are white, which means you're actually beefing your opponent's creatures if there's any white in them. However, that whole other section of decks that are out there that are non-white, you will be able to Plague Effect their board, which is really cool. And the cool thing I want to say about Magic right now is everyone's brewing with decks, which makes me very, very happy. There's lots of different deck ideas. If you don't want to do goats, there's lots of different deck ideas you can build around with Crovax. Go look online and you'll find something for sure. But that means everything in this set is S tier because everyone's building different deck ideas for them. So go check it out. Let me know in the comments below. And thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!